And so you'll just have to click OK or leave and watch it later. But just be aware that anything you say tonight on our webinar is being recorded and will be put in a public space. So I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. Okay, now you should now be able to see the screen I'm sharing. Can everyone see that?
Yes, that's all good.
That's great. All right, just rearrange a couple of things and then we'll be ready to go. Thank you for your patience. Just making sure I can see you all at the same time. Okay, so tonight's webinar is a webinar to present CAFNEC's response to the public environment report for the Chalumbin wind farm proposal. But before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the Gimoy, Wallabari, Yidinji and Yurikandji people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I am on today and work and live on, but also to pay my respects to First Nations people all over Far North Queensland, which is the area that CAFNEC works for, and all over Australia, to acknowledge that sovereignty wasn't ceded and to acknowledge the important learning, knowledge and strength of First Nations people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, and how much we have to learn and grow together. And if you want to pop in the chat the country that you're joining from today, that's always a really nice way of acknowledging all of the places from which we're calling in from tonight. So I guess just for context, I'm guessing that because all of you are here, it means you're quite engaged with the Chalumbin Wind Farm project. But if you haven't already found it, and I will be putting these slides on our website as well, the report is available on the proponent's website, which is Arc Energy. I've read through the 2,000 odd pages of the report. It was a long slog. And as a result of that, we've made 40 recommendations regarding the proposal. But given the details provided in the PER, CAFNEC will be writing to the Federal Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek, to recommend that she rejects this proposal. But we're also putting those recommendations in there so that there is a fully detailed and transparent account of what this project is proposing to do and the impact that it will have. So I guess I wanted to say that first, because I think that's probably one of the things that many people are interested to hear. And what I'm going to do tonight is I'm not going to run you through everything that I've written in our report, because there's 10,000 plus words in there. I decided I wrote a small thesis in 2 weeks, but it is available on our website. So if you do want to read through the detail, I have uploaded that now, and I'll show you the link at the end of the show. I'm going to go through the whole presentation and then happy to have a Q&A at the end, and we'll also be showing you how you can act on this project if you would like to. So that's a bit of what we're going to do tonight in this webinar. And if you have questions as you go along, please put them in the chat so that you can refer back to them, because I often find that I have questions along the way, but by the end of the presentation, I've usually forgot them. So feel free to pop them in the chat so you can refer back to them. Before we get into the details of this proposal, I do want to center us in exactly what we're talking about this proposal interacting with, because we are going to need a really rapid transition to renewable energy if we're going to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And, you know, if we don't address the impacts of climate change, the result could be that we lose, you know, a lot of our natural places anyway. But there is appropriate development and then there's inappropriate development. And so before I go into the detail of this public environment report, I really want to ground us in what are we talking about here. This proposal is the closest turbine will be 600 meters from the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area. And so what I want to remind us of before we start is, what is the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area? What are its values? And what are we really talking about impacting here? So I'm going to play a short video from the Wet Tropics Management Authority that was made for the 30-year celebration. And what I've realized is I didn't share my screen with sound, so I'm just going to have to do that so I can play you all the video. Otherwise you won't be able to hear it, which will be sad. Can you see the slideshow again? Yep. And now you'll be able to hear it. And this is just to make sure that we are really centering ourselves in the ecosystem and the important, outstanding universal values that are at risk here.
The Wet Tropics of Queensland World Heritage Area was inscribed as a World Heritage Property on the 9th of December 1988. It is one of an elite group of World Heritage properties listed for all 4 natural criteria. 2018 marks its 30th anniversary. Stretching 450 kilometres along the North Queensland coastline from Cooktown to Townsville, the area is famous for its spectacular scenery. Breathtaking vistas abound of rainforest, rugged gorges, mountain peaks, volcanic crater lakes, wild rivers and cascading waterfalls. Tropical North Queensland's 2 World Heritage Areas exist side by side: the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area and the Great Barrier Reef World Heritage Area, making the region a tourist haven. Some 32% of Australia's terrestrial fauna species are found in the area, which comprises less than 0.2% of the continent. These rainforests are globally significant relics of the Great Gondwana rainforests that covered Australia 50 to 100 million years ago. New species are still being discovered. At last count, more than 3,300 species of plants and over 700 species of vertebrate animals call it home. Some of these are found nowhere else in the world. In 2012, Australia's National Heritage List recognised the area for its Indigenous cultural values, including the distinctiveness of rainforest Aboriginal traditions, their land management techniques, and the technical innovation and expertise needed to process food, in particular toxic plants. The rainforests form the core of the spiritual, social and cultural beliefs and are vital to rainforest Aboriginal people's identity. This holistic approach to managing country reflects a deep traditional understanding of this vast cultural landscape, adding to the beauty and significance of the Wet Tropics. This region was one of the most populated areas in Australia and the only place where Aboriginal people live permanently in the rainforest. Today, there are at least 20 rainforest Aboriginal tribal groups, 120 clans and 8 language groups. Currently over 20,000 people with ongoing traditional connections to land in the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area.
So I guess I thought it was important to, can you still hear me? Sorry, I can't remember. Yeah, you can, sorry. I think it was really important to share a little bit, and I think a lot of people on this call tonight are very connected to the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area, but I think it is always really important to centre ourselves in the significance of it. 0.2% of our landmass in Australia, that means there is, and we have about 32% of that biodiversity. That means that there's 98.8 98% of Australia that isn't the wet tropics and isn't this globally significant place. And so what we've done in this proposal is that we've taken one of the most unique places on Earth, only 0.2% of our landmass in Australia, and we've said this is where we're going to build a wind farm. And at the core of everything here, and something that CAFNEC has communicated with the developer since the very first day it met with us, is that this is not an appropriate place for a wind farm. It's poorly sited. Biodiversity wasn't considered when they chose where to put the wind farm. And there is a certain type of impact that isn't offsettable. You can't mitigate it, and it isn't acceptable for our climate and nature future, or for the people and the country that it happens on. So before I go into all of the detail, this is a message that CAFNEC has said to the developer, that we think it's very unlikely that the impacts of this development are in any way appropriate or reasonable, and that the project is poorly sited. I knew that reading through the public environment report would raise concerns for CAFNEC. What I can say after reading through it is the concerns are much greater than I originally thought they would be. So that's what I'm going to run you through now. Oh, it's playing again. I've got to go next. Okay, so now this is a very text heavy slide. I usually try to avoid that, but this is one of those situations where the devil's in the detail and it's important to share the information. So the first thing to say is that there isn't actually capacity in our transmission lines for this project. After the upgrade to our grid up here, there was 500 megawatts in the line. Caban Wind Farm has taken up a bunch of that. And what I know after speaking directly to PowerLink is that there is currently 350 megawatts in the line that's available. This proposal is 602 megawatts. The other thing that what PowerLink indicated is that there isn't any current plan to upgrade the transmission within the next 10 years, and unless there's something that happens through the Queensland Energy and Jobs Plan. So the likelihood of there being transmission for this project in the near future is also low. The second part of that is that stage one of the project will generate just over the current capacity. So it will generate 364 megawatts, which is more than the 350 available. But the other reality is that stage one of this project is the highest impact. That's the bit part of the project that's right next to the World Heritage Area. Stage two is situated in the Ainsley Uplands, which will still have an impact on some really important species and habitat, but definitely has less impact than stage one, which hosts a lot of wet sclerophyll forest, which is a really important, what they call ecotone, which is where two types of forests meet, the wet tropics rainforest and the sclerophyll forest. So not only is the proponent proposing to provide energy that there isn't availability in the grid for, they're also choosing the half of their project, stage one, that will have the highest impact. So there hasn't been a strategic assessment of the grid availability or how to stage it out for energy, the best energy outcome. But what we can see here is that while the proponent has argued that this project is essential for the transition to renewable energy, it clearly isn't the most strategic next step for, our transition. So, the first glaring problem here is that there isn't 602 megawatts of capacity in our current line, and upgrading that line would significantly increase pressure on the World Heritage Area, which it sort of punches straight through. So that's a really important thing to note. Cumulative impact assessment has been inadequate. So under federal laws, the proponent is required to properly assess the cumulative impacts to what they call matters of national environmental significance. So the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act, the EPBC Act, is really tasked with protecting anything that's considered a matter of national environmental significance. And with projects like that, this one, people are asked to assess the cumulative impacts, and that's looking at what other, renewable energy proposals in the area could also, or any development could, add up to an overall unacceptable impact. Now, we already know that there's proposals like the Upper Burdekin wind farm and the Mount Fox wind farm. From what we can see, the proponent hasn't in any way actively or engaged with or initiated contact with those proponents. They've simply taken publicly available information. Now, that's not very thorough, and we really believe that there needs to be more specific assessment of what impacts are happening from those other, particularly energy developments that are impacting wet sclerophyll, threatened species, koala habitat, all of those kind of things, and really looking at what those cumulative impacts could be, particularly with the developments that are on this same transmission line, because that is very, very clearly a cumulative impact. And we have a number of, developments that are potentially going to have a really significant impact on the borders of our World Heritage Area and some really unique types of habitat. I'm going to keep going through, and like I said, questions at the end. So the next thing is that there has been a really, really poor consideration of alternatives. The EPBC Act asks people to, the proponent to describe the alternatives that they've explored. The information that has been provided by the proponent has made some statements that we can't find any evidence for, and particularly that one that an alternative location scenario, west or in the Ainsley uplands would expect it to have at least 30% greater impact on MNES or matters of national environmental significance. There's been no data to demonstrate that. And what we do know is that west into the Ainsley uplands, there is actually really good wind availability, 7 to 11 meters per second in disrupted landscapes. And so what we're seeing is that, and you can see from the table there, in environment reporting in Queensland, we look at our bioregions. There's 13 bioregions. It's looking, the table I've provided is looking at the percentage of endangered or of concern regional ecosystems, which are regional ecosystems that are on extinction pathways or are very threatened. Wet tropics has the most at-risk regional ecosystems. So what we've done here is we've chosen, of all of the bioregions in Queensland, we've chosen the one where there's the least, reason to be developing that area. Now, it's not to say that there aren't important, Channel Country, for example, is 9.3%. That doesn't mean we should go and build everything out there. There's really important stuff out there. This is just one way of looking at what's important. But what we can see is that this is a bioregion that has a really high level of ecosystems that are of concern. And this proposal is a really big disruptor of that. And really, what we're seeing is that the proponent has said that the financial cost of building a line, from transmission out to a place where the development can happen in a less biodiverse area is too high financially. But our argument is that the cost to the environment of building 600 meters from the World Heritage Area is far too high. And what we're seeing across the world with Sustainable Development Goals, the guidance from the International Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is that we need to be looking at these things holistically. We need to be using the triple bottom line of sustainability and recognizing that environmental cost must be considered first, because we all exist within that. And so what, the proponent hasn't provided good enough justification or representation of their alternatives that they've considered, but also their consideration of alternative statement basically says that it's too expensive to go anywhere else. And we're at a stage, it's the 21st century, where we just don't think that that is a good enough argument anymore. Thank you, Stephen, who's on the call with us tonight, for all of the work that you do, providing us imagery of what this looks like on the ground. The scale of clearing that is associated with this project is far beyond other projects. You can see the impacts of Kaban here, clearing, vegetated landscapes. If you look over to the right a bit, I've put this little black, and also thanks Stephen for the mapping. Stephen's been a really important resource in this work. You can see this black area here is the clearing that these pictures depicts. Then you look at this really big black line all the way through here, that's Chalumbin. So if you're, and I think many people on this call tonight are, local to the area where this is happening, and you've probably seen the scale of impact that Kaban is having. Kaban only cleared 129 hectares. This is proposing to clear 1,026 hectares outright. So you can imagine the landscape scale impact that this is going to have, the visual amenity impacts, the impacts of clearing this much vegetation is very high. Now, recently, Australia signed up to the Glasgow Leaders Declaration of Forests and Land Use, which committed us to ending deforestation by 2030. That's only 8 years away. We are looking at a really fast transition to renewable energy, and if we approve this wind farm and therefore give a market indicator that clearing 1,000 hectares of forest for renewable energy is permissible, then we're absolutely not going to meet our commitment to ending deforestation by 2030. So we are a signatory to that commitment, and it is really important that we know that, in Queensland at least, which has the second highest land clearing rates in the world, we're setting a precedent here. And this could rapidly increase the impact of development in our land clearing space. And we really need to be clear about what's happening here. And as I said before, the siting didn't consider biodiversity. It considered proximity to the grid, it considered available land tenure, and it considered high wind factors, but it didn't consider biodiversity. And that's why we're seeing this kind of clearing necessary. I should also share that there's about just over 100 hectares of that will be wet sclerophyll forest, which is a very important ecotone that is a place that has high endemism for different species like bettongs and other, animals that are really very limited to those types of forests between between sclerophyll and wet tropics. So they are increasingly threatened because they largely occur on the borders between the protected World Heritage Area and the impacted landscape that often exists outside of it. The impacts to threatened species habitat are very high. So in the State of Environment Committee's report in 2011, the government stated that the key threats to biodiversity in Australia are habitat loss, fragmentation of habitat, climate change, land use change, invasive species and pathogens, grazing, alternate fire regimes, and changed hydrology. This development will feature 5 out of 8 of those key threats. So what we're seeing is that this development, specifically because of where it's located and the threatened species habitat it's impacting, is directly creating threats to our biodiversity. The table that I've done there in the public environment report, I don't think there was a very good representation of the kind of threatened species habitat loss that we're losing cumulatively. While it's only 1,000, I shouldn't say only, there is the huge 1,067 hectares that will be cleared outright is home to multiple endangered species. Now, if we knocked down an apartment building that housed, 100 or 200 people, we wouldn't say one person's lost their home. We would say, 200 people lost their home because we knocked down an apartment building. It's the same kind of concept with threatened species habitat. While we're only losing 1,000 hectares outright, we're actually losing 8,043.21 hectares of threatened species habitat, and 3,730 of that will be considered what is a significant impact, which affects the species' ability to survive, in the wild. So I've bolded the species that the proponent has decided will be significantly impacted by this development. And the other thing I'll mention in there is a lot of the offsetting of these impacts is research. Now, that's not an offset, because if this impact is, you know, accelerating the extinction pathway for these animals, and then we do research, all we'll be researching is the extinction of the species. So we really need to be clear about, we know that our offsetting program isn't working in Australia. It's a part of the Samuels review. It's a part of the knowledge we have as a country now. So we really need to be specific about expecting better than that. The spectacled flying fox part of it is particularly concerning. There hasn't been any engagement with the recovery team in that case. And with a roost only 20 kilometres away, this is key foraging habitat. And we know that bats are very impacted by wind turbines. The magnificent brood frog, it says that there is intention to fund research. Research isn't good enough, intention is even worse. So we want to see actual commitments if there is going to be this kind of thing happening. The other concerning thing is some discrepancies between the SARA and federal assessment. So SARA is the State Assessments and Referrals Agency. Unfortunately, because Queensland laws are insufficient, there isn't any community consultation on the state assessments at this stage, which means we weren't able to comment on it. But I did compare the federal assessment with the state assessment, and I found these two fairly distinct things that are concerning to us. In the state approvals, there's a lot of detail about 3 different nests that were found. Obviously, if there are nests that have been recently built and are likely to be belong to red goshawks, then we should be making that clear in the information that's provided in the federal report. More concerningly is around the white-throated needletail. While mapping was done in the federal report, and it's the entire site is habitat for the white-throated needletail, there was no actual assessment of the impact. They said it's potentially across all the site, but we didn't actually find one. But in the state report, it said we did find a deceased individual underneath the transmission on site. So that's a really distinct variance between the two reporting. In the response that I have written, I've said that there's clear discrepancies, which means that there has been some information that the proponent has that haven't been provided in the federal report, and that we need to do a thorough comparison between these two assessment processes, ensure that all available information that the proponent has is put into these reports, because that obviously doesn't help public trust and doesn't result in a good and thorough assessment of impacts. Another one that was missed in the federal assessment is the lack of consideration of things that are listed under the state environmental laws. Now, the federal environmental laws don't have to consider species that are listed at a state level that are not listed at a federal level. However, the state and federal governments have made very clear commitments to the common assessment method to ensure that there is consistent listing and consistent approaches to threatened species management. So in the report that I've written, I've said that based on this intention and clear need for consistent management, that in this case, we should be considering species listed under the state laws that haven't been assessed, because in Queensland, wind farms are code assessable. And the really concerning part of that is the Lumholtz tree kangaroo. Now, reading through the state assessment, what they found was they did find a mother and baby tree kangaroo on site at the Chalumbin site, and there are photos of it if you go back to the state assessment. And they've also mapped the tree kangaroo habitat on site, and there are 3 locations where turbines or roads will be directly clearing tree kangaroo habitat on this site. Now, the reason why that's really concerning is because tree kangaroos have really high site fidelity. So they will just sit in place. If a tree's knocked down, they'll just sit on the ground there forever. They were found on site, and habitat will be cleared for development. I think the last thing is that in the report I put forward, the tree kangaroo is absolutely an iconic species of our region, and I think would definitely be considered part of the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage Area. So even if the minister or assessment team decide not to consider things that are listed under the state environmental laws, I'd be strongly encouraging them to consider the tree kangaroo, because it is such an iconic species and because it has such limited habitat and such high site fidelity, which means it will stay in the one place. There's a lot to get through, so I'm going to keep going. This is probably one of the most concerning pieces, and it took me about 2 hours to convince myself that the proponent's crazy and not myself, but I did get there. There's 2 offset areas on the site that the proponent has proposed. This is what they're calling offset area 1. On the right here, you can see that this is the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area, particularly the Coombalooma South Forest Reserve, but it is in the World Heritage Area. And over here, we have Yorka Nature Reserve. Now, what we currently have is a natural undisturbed landscape here where there is landscape connectivity. What the proponent's proposing to do is build about 30 kilometres of road straight down the middle here, put in 16 wind turbines, and then offset the area around it as a proposed landscape connectivity between the World Heritage Area and Yorka Reserve. The first thing to say that is that this is permissible because we have absolutely failing offset laws, and they need to be redone and rewritten, and we hope that the Samuels review will encourage that. But what is relevant for this proposal right now is this offset will not increase connectivity across those 2 protected areas. In fact, it will fragment what is an unprotected part of connectivity already. So if this was really truly an offset, they'd be getting rid of that development straight through the middle of it and just simply protecting that area in its own right as landscape connectivity. So currently, the larger of the 2 offsets is increasing fragmentation in our landscape and preventing connectivity between these 2 protected areas. I don't have more to say on that because it's just so obviously a bad idea. There's no fire management plan at all currently, which is a major issue. There's at one point in the proposal where it said that fires stop at Wet Tropics rainforest. That might have been the case one day, but we are living in a climate affected future present. We have seen 250 hectares burn across the Wet Tropics. We also saw major parts of the Iron Ranges burn in the 2019-2020 bushfires, where we lost another 190 hectares of tropical rainforest. We know that tropical rainforests burn. The Wet Tropics Management Authority knows that tropical rainforests burn and that they are drier than they've ever been before. Recent research published by JCU has demonstrated that our rainforests are drying 3 times faster than they have. So they are really dry. If they're cyclone affected, they're much more at risk of fire. The proponent is going to be putting roads very close to the World Heritage Area. We know that these are fire vectors. We know that the disruption of these wet sclerophyll forests close to the World Heritage Area can increase fire risk. And more importantly, they're really missing an opportunity to engage durable people to do good cultural fire management on site. Not that that would offset these impacts, but the complete lack of fire management plan is not only a very clear risk to the World Heritage Area, it's a major miss for what could be much more meaningful you know, opportunities for First Nations people in the area. Which brings me to the next point is that there has been poor consultation and poor traditional owner engagement with this proposal. There isn't a good reflection of CAFNEC's feedback around the siting, which is what I have described. I have also in my submission described the inadequacy of the early meetings provided by the proponent with the Ravenshoe community, which I probably don't have to describe to those on the call tonight. But you know, the engagement has much been more about telling people what they're getting rather than understanding what the community needs, and that's reflected, you know, in the social impact, which I'll go to next. The third point there is that the proponent has engaged with Cape York Land Council and it has engaged with the Wabblebatta Aboriginal Corporation, but we're still seeing a lot of division and harm in the First Nations community, which reflects the lack of broader consultation that this proponent has done with First Nations people and traditional owners, particularly reaching down to the Tully part of the Durable community who still have connection up to that area where the proponent is. So we have recommended that the proponent needs to do broader and deeper consultation to understand why so many of the traditional owner custodians still are fighting back against this and why there's such a large petition of TOs who do not agree with this development. These are all the dot points that have in no way been addressed in the assessment at all. I'm a social scientist, so this is always really important to me, which is how is this development in any way going to be of benefit to the community? Currently, the proponent has said in their impact that the 350 odd people who will be required for the development of this project will be housed in the available accommodation in Ravenshoe, which is a little bit funny because I don't know what that is, and there's been no assessment of there's been no assessment of available accommodation in Ravenshoe, so they haven't actually done any assessment of the current availability. They have said that they are considering providing temporary accommodation in consultation with Tablelands Regional Council, but they haven't provided any information or evidence of that consultation with the council. And we would argue that if there's going to be housing and housing developed in association with this, that it should be permanent and good housing to help relieve the housing crisis that the community is already facing. Along with that, there's been no commitment to any training or upskilling programs to help local people who need jobs come into this. And when we talk about an economic transition, this is exactly what's been fought for in Gladstone and other parts of Queensland. We should be expecting the same, and we should be seeing that these projects, if they do come through, are empowering local people to have a stronger economy, to be trained up, to have good jobs. And that is not reflected in this proposal at all. And there hasn't been any assessment of the cultural impact of this development to Ravenshoe. So with a lot more potentially fly in, fly out workers, the kind of service needs, the health needs, you know, it wasn't that long ago that Ravenshoe didn't have an ambulance service, but there will be a higher, I guess, pressure on the community infrastructure. So that hasn't been assessed at all, and that really needs to be understood, and particularly the mental and physical well-being and sociocultural needs of the community. So how is this huge development going to change the culture of Ravenshoe? And we can see this from mining, you know, how Mount Isa has changed with the mining, you know, industry there. Obviously, this isn't to the scale of Mount Isa, but it's the same kind of thing. We need to be considering what kind of town will Ravenshoe be, because this will be the primary industry in Ravenshoe once this wind farm gets built. The rehabilitation plan is fairly disappointing, to say the least. There's no detailed, so the proponent has said that they will rehabilitate 70% of the area cleared of that 1,026 hectares. However, the decommissioning, the lifespan of a wind farm is 30 years. There isn't any detailed decommissioning plan, but the assumption is that if you have to clear to bring things in, you would also have to clear to bring things out, which means the potential result of this is that, yes, we've planted, 70% of the site up again, but then we chop it all down again 30 years later. There is actually no information or plan provided on exactly what kind of rehabilitation will be done, where the trees will come from, if we're going to plant suitable habitat for the threatened species that replace the habitat that's been cleared. So are we just planting homogeneous pine forest, or are we planting a biodiverse, planting that supports the threatened species that lived there once before? And at one point, the plan refers to the length of time that it will take for trees to grow back, and it references the landholder saying that when they built the transmission line, it only took 20 years for the trees to grow back, which we don't think is an adequate or scientific way to measure how long it will take to rehabilitate the landscape that is cleared. So there is no detailed information provided regarding the timelines for rehabilitated areas returning to usable habitat for threatened species. And additionally, because there's no decommissioning plan, there is no requirement for the proponent to rehabilitate areas that are cleared when the wind farm is decommissioned. So the rehabilitation plan leaves a big list of questions and a lot of concerns. Okay, I'm going to go back one more before we get into that, and I tell you the next bit, because there's a bunch more in the detailed submission I've written, and you can all go ahead and read it. But for now, I just wanted to see from what I've shared so far, before we go to what I think the next steps are, I'd love to see if there's any questions that I can answer. And just noting that we've only got about 10 minutes left, so I'm probably going to leave questions to about 5 minutes. And feel free to just put your hand up. And just trying to focus on questions more than comments. I'll go to Sharon first, and just don't forget to unmute yourself.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I was just going to say too, I went through the ones that are from 60s to 70s the other day. Their studies are done in the winter time and I went through and did some spotlighting, and there is massive amount of gliders through there, and they're saying that there's one spotted every hour, and that is so untrue. Like, I've only had the first time I went was just an iPhone and a spotlight, and it's just alive with them all through there, and many different species. The other thing at the very bottom, near Sunday Creek, they've put a machine up that's actually making so they to record things, and it's actually making a high-pitched noise, and it says you must wear here on this machine. I can send you the photos. It says you must wear hearing stuff, and this is to record the wildlife, yet it's making a high-pitched noise going.
That seems very contradictory. Yeah, feel free to send that through.
It's frightening the animals away. So how can their studies be comprehensible, you know?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Sharon. And, I think it's so interesting, and why it's so important to make submissions is the breadth of skills that you need to really understand all of the impacts. One of the things I didn't touch on in my submission, because I don't have the skills to, is the methods for their monitoring, but I know of a number of people who have put in really detailed submissions on that. So thank you for sharing that. And I think it's a really important point from conversations I've had with a number of very experienced scientists, is that there are not adequate surveys done, and there's some really strong recommendations that can be made there. So if you have that knowledge, I really encourage you to write them in, and I'm going to share a little bit more about that in a minute. Stephen, did you have your hand up?
I just quickly want to just add to Sharon. I know Sharon went out the other night with Michael, and I think you saw 12 graded gliders and 2 yellow belly gliders, and filmed a yellow belly glider gliding near where a turbine pad is going. So that was just amazing. And you've got the GPS locations.
Yeah.
So submit that if you can.
Yeah.
The other thing, just back to your first point, Lucy, it's more of a comment, not a question. You were saying there's only 350 megawatt of available capacity. The solution is that there's these other big solar farms proposed as well, such as Atherton, Shuko Road and Mariba Solar. That capacity can be filled up with other projects that may be least damaging in lower biodiversity in actually already cleared land.
Yeah.
So that is an alternative. It's a viable alternative. Yeah, so
yeah, thank you, Stephen.
Lots of other things I want to talk about, but we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, okay, no worries.
This is a fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Thanks
you. Very much, Lucy.
No worries, Carolyn. I'll pop to Ingrid. Do you have a question?
I've actually got 2 questions. Is
Great.
there a bond being put in place?
No.
Okay, and the second question is, what are they doing for soil erosion and soil erosion and runoff into the headwaters of the catchment? Actually, it's 3 questions. And
I'll answer that one because otherwise I won't remember.
Okay.
But there is an impact. There is a part of the PER that talks about the soil erosion, but it was very light on detail, and I would really encourage you guys to have a look at it. I personally didn't have the scientific knowledge or the strength to keep going at that point.
Sure.
So that's why a diversity of submissions are good. And what's the third question? And then we'll go over to Aaron.
Sure. And the third question is anyone touching on the trees rainmaking and creation of climatic rain moisture?
I haven't, but I think it's a really good point, and it reminds me I might also add to that submission that I've made, because the thing that I have forgotten to put in there is the really important climate refugia part. So a lot of these turbines will be on the tops of hill slopes where there is important climate refugia, and that is becoming more important as the climate changes. I'm going to go to Aaron.
I found a slide I can share.
Okay, great. And I'll show you where you can put that at the end. I'll go to Aaron and then Alison and then back to Sharon, who put their hand up. So Aaron, do you want to unmute yourself and share or ask? You got to unmute, buddy. There we go. Oh, no, you did it again. Press that button again. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad there's people better qualified than me who are saying that their sampling is just garbage, because it's not ethical, it's inadequate, and it's just borderline negligent, in my opinion.
Did you have a question?
Well, the people that did it should be ashamed of themselves.
Well, I think we can always try to avoid personal attacks in our response, but if you have helpful suggestions, I think that would be well taken.
Well,
but do you have a question?
It's not professional.
Lucy.
Green parks would be shutting them down, I think, with the erosion in the wet season.
Yeah, and I think
it's definitely going to impact. So, and I've told them that.
And one thing you can definitely share that I have put in is around their dust management, because their dust management's, I can't remember exactly what they said that their dust management would be, but it did say afterwards that it would become redundant once it started raining, which is very inadequate, obviously. Alison, I'll jump over to you, then Sharon, and then we'll go back to Carolyn. And then we'll go to Ingrid.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. That was really great and very clear. What I'm kind of thinking is, it seems that these, having been to the presentation in Ravenshoe, and Matt has gone through the whole thing and is talking about the inconsistencies in the way it's done, it sounded very much like the Kerwell stuff. And basically the main thing that comes through to me is that they have no care for the environment. They have no care for the social impacts. they just want to tick boxes so they can go ahead and do what they want to do, and they're doing that to make money. I want to know, like, what kind of risks are they taking in doing what they're doing financially? And are they in fact not taking very much risk at all because it's all backed up by the taxpayer anyway? Like, I want to know that, you know, like, and what have they, if they were genuine.
Hey, Alison, I might just pull you up because we've only got 3 minutes left now, and I really want to share next steps. And
okay.
I think, you know, what you're saying is really valid. And that's, you know, I think really, I'm going to talk about in a minute why what you just said is really important and where we can take those kind of thoughts. I'm going to see if there's any other questions. If there's no questions, not taking comments, but if there's a question. So I'll go, Carolyn, have you got a question? And then I'll go to Ingrid.
Look, I do, Lucy. Look, it does concern something that is our forte. The question is, how much time and effort have they taken on their assessment of revegetation, when I'd just like more information about how they want to do their re-veg, because the reason, and I guess this is a statement, obviously this is our forte, we've got people on the team that are expert at re-veg, and their comment was for wet sclerophyll ecosystems, dry sclerophyll, all of them will take about 80 to 200 years. But my question is, how do they propose to do it when the turbines themselves kill off keystone species that help regenerate? That's my question.
So at the moment, the rehabilitation plan is very, very thin on detail, and none of that has been provided, which is a really important point to make. And I think, you know, what you can add to that is there hasn't been engagement with local rehabilitation groups like yourselves, Treat, all of, you know, those groups up there, or even I'm not sure that they've engaged with the Tablelands Regional Council's rehabilitation programs anyway. So please include that. I'll jump over to Ingrid for your question, and then we'll wrap up questions.
Thanks, Lucy. Hey, I just wanted to know if is anyone going in to recover any of the brood frogs and put them into any kind of like safe house while this is all going, when some of the runoff is already entering the creeks and everything?
At the moment, there's no
like any experts.
So at the moment, there's no in the like I can't say generally, but in the public environment report, there's no requirement or plan for that.
Okay, because I know on the Bellingen River, when there was a development there, turtles went in and rescued turtles. So we need to do something.
And sometimes
and water quality. Is anyone doing water quality?
Water quality testing is regular in the PER.
Okay.
But it is also self-reporting. I'm going to pause us because I love our passionate community and we can go on for a long time, but also that this is a recording that people will watch, and the next bit is important, and also that you can call me anytime. So I put a QR code there. There's a couple of things I think that are important to note. The process for submissions in the EPBC Act is pretty poor and the transparency is low. So currently what happens now is our submissions get sent to Arc Energy. Arc Energy considers those submissions and then prepares the final public environment report, which gets sent to the assessment team. There's no requirement for Arc Energy to make those submissions public. So what I've done is a couple of things. I've made a submission, a template submission that you can use if you haven't written a detailed one. On that submission, you can add to it, but it also includes the 40 recommendations that CAFNEC has included in our report. And you can send those to info@chalumbinwindfarm.com.au. But also if you scan that QR code, you'll find a form that allows you to upload your submissions to our website, and that will go into a folder, and that pardon me, that folder is accessible through our website. So not only can you put your submission in there, you can go in and look at all the other submissions that people who are associated with CAFNEC have been keeping. The reason I wanted to do that is so that there is transparency about all the submissions, or at least a lot of the submissions that go in, so that when the final report comes through, we can say whether or not those submissions have properly, so the final PER has properly considered our submissions. But I guess the final thing I wanted to say is that our federal laws are inadequate. The Samuels review has proven how they have failed to protect our nature, and those laws haven't yet changed. So this will really come down to Minister Plibersek, and I think it is really important that we're all writing to her. So the link that's there goes to this website. On our website here, you can read a little bit about our opinion. Then you can also download this template. This is the template that you'll get taken to. There's some boxes here where you can add, you know, your thoughts that you might have. And then I've included the 40 recommendations that we've made as well, and you know, signing it off. Additionally, writing to the minister can be hard, so I've provided a template for you all to do that. It has the details that you need there. It has a little area for you to say something about yourself, and again, urging the minister to reject this proposal, the particular concerns that we have. And then I've also included here the vision that we have. So it's not only important to say why we don't want this wind farm, but on CAFNEC's website, we also have established through collaboration with people across Queensland, a vision for a restorative renewable energy and the principles associated with that. So you don't have to include that in your letter, but I think it is a really good way to demonstrate to the minister that there is support for renewable energy in our region, there is support for this transition, but it doesn't look like this wind farm. Once you've sent those off, you can come down here to our submission. So this is not, doing this form doesn't send it to anyone. You have to still send that submission and send the email yourself. But you can upload your submission and your letter you wrote to the minister here so that we can keep a track of them. I'm going to see the Federal Environment Minister next week on Thursday. So if you upload your letter to your minister before Tuesday next week, which is when I fly down and then hit the road, but if you upload it before then, I will print it off and take it to her and hand it to her myself. And then I've said a little bit about the transparency of the EPBC Act process here, but if you click on this button, see everyone's submissions, it takes you to a Google Drive folder where we're collecting people's submissions and that you can see them transparently and publicly. So we've put a bit of work into trying to ensure that everyone has a voice here when it comes to this proposal, that there's transparency with the feedback that's been provided to Arc Energy, because I think many of us have concerns about their track record and their public consultation so far. And I will be putting some stuff on our social media, you know, and on our website to talk about this in the coming weeks. We only have about 2 weeks to get all these submissions in. So I think it's really important that I'll be putting this recording up on our website and sharing it on social media. So please share it as much as you can. But when it comes down to it, this will be decided, you know, it will be decided by our assessments team to a degree, because they will make a recommendation to the minister. But when it comes down to it, it's Minister Tanya Plibersek who decides whether or not this project goes ahead. And I think we really need to communicate to her that it's our outstanding universal values that are at risk here. And when it comes down to it, this wind farm is just in the wrong place. There's a lot of stuff happening in the chat. There's a lot of projects that are going on at the moment. And yeah, I think if you have any more questions or anything like that, or things that you think would be useful to have on the website, please email me or call me. And yeah, for now, thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. That was really good, Lucy.
No worries. Thanks everyone for
Brilliant.
coming.
Okay, thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
That's helpful.
Thanks very much.